mission doesn't end with the satellite. We are investing a lot of money to maintain the data that is the ultimate product of a space program. Even when the satellite has long been forgotten and has ceased to exist, we spend a lot of effort making sure that our data is not only securely stored, but is always kept in a format that can be seamlessly used by the most modern data integration systems.
Hey, SpaceWatchers, and welcome to a new episode of Space Café Radio, your channel about trends, awesome events, and interesting people in the space sector. Today, I'm very excited to talk about the satellite watching over the lungs of the Earth with Dr. Nicolaus Hanowski. And Nick is the head of the Mission Management and Ground Segment Department at the Earth Observation Directorate at the European Space Agency, ESA, where he oversees operations and data systems for Earth observation missions, including the Copernicus Sentinel satellites. And with a PhD in Earth and planetary science, he has contributed to major ESA missions such as Rosetta, Gaia, James Webb, and Euclid, and leads ESA's efforts in the EU Destination Earth initiative, developing digital twins of Earth to enhance predictive environmental monitoring. Wow, that sounds impressive. Welcome, Nick. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. It's the day after the launch, and we've just received the second launch and early orbit phase report. These are extremely important reports that give us a good insight into how the satellite is doing after the critical hours of starting operations, and everything looks extremely good. It's a phase in which the satellite really needs the attention of a lot of subsystem specialists. And we are just in the phase where the satellite is now generating its own power. That makes it an independent being, as that's an extremely good step to take. And everything is going smoothly. So we are very happy here.
That sounds very good. I mean, yesterday was an absolute interesting day. It was a launch of the Biomass satellite on board a Vega rocket. So fingers crossed for any of the Vega launches. But it marked obviously another important step into ESA's Earth observation program. Let's dive into it, why this mission matters. We could say, hey, just another satellite for Earth observation. So what is the big deal here?
The Biomass is part of the Earth Explorer constellation, I would even call it. It's one of these missions that we have started as a series more than 10 years ago. And these are missions who do exploration in two distinct ways. Exploration of the Earth in order to really see what we can understand about Earth that we haven't understood yet, and to provide with that new understanding, with the new aspects of the properties of the Earth system, a good basis for decision making. And that's number one. This is really our ambition, to use Earth observation satellites to discover, to explore new aspects of our planet that we haven't fully understood yet. And that may require our attention, may require a good decision making in order to exercise good stewardship of the planet. But there's a second component of exploration, and that's why the name Earth Explorer is very fitting, is we are exploring the limits of the technological possible with these satellites. Each of the Earth Explorers has an instrument, a mission profile, and a technological ambition coming together with the instrument, with the mission profile, with the scientific underlying ambitions that is completely new, never been tried before. And that is what we call exploring the limits of the technological feasible. This is why these systems cannot immediately be entered into what we call operational services. We need to understand first how these novel technologies, how these innovative systems are really behaving, what kind of information content is really hidden in the things that we are discovering. And it turns out that we're extremely successful with that approach, because all of the Earth Explorers so far have not only generated new types of data, gravitational data, wind speed data, soil moisture data. These are all examples of things that have been systematically measured by our Earth Explorers. But we also see that they are generating data that, for example, is viable for commercial applications that companies can use in order to complement their Earth observation data services with additional data that is giving additional value. One example, it turns out that specific kinds of soil moisture data is extremely useful for fire management, fire prediction in infrared satellite configurations. And what we also see, and completely unexpected, is two other things. First thing, there is operational services that can integrate the data seamlessly, such as the Nicolaus wind data in the past for weather forecasts. That's an example where data that was originally intended to expand our view of what we can understand about the Earth directly into existing data sets that deliver operational forecasting in the weather domain. Just as an example, there are other examples as well.
You put in a lot of our content now in the first statement. Let's try to dismantle it a bit more. Within this fleet of the Earth Explorer satellites, you said it's one of them, and it has a super unique configuration, structure, architecture, call it as you want. This kind of, 12-meter large reflector antenna is something what you usually use in communication for, I think, L-band. And maybe you can tell us a bit more, why is this satellite so unique before we then come to that's something what is very close to my heart. What is the P-band radar thing and how does it work and all of the data that come from it?
So first of all, P-band radar is a specific frequency range of radar radio waves. So it's part of the electromagnetic spectrum. It's comparatively long wavelengths. That explains already why we need this big reflector system in order to bundle the radar beam and to focus the detection. And the understanding that this kind of radar range is useful for understanding, for analyzing vegetation is quite recent. P-band has been used in different contexts, and we know quite well that P-band, for example, it can be used in communications as well. But specific application and the specific use to get what we call tomographic images of vegetation is something quite recently worked out and understood and developed. And in that sense, this satellite Biomass is the first satellite to use it systematically for that purpose. So that's the novelty. With the P-band radar, we are really able to detect the biomass, not only qualitatively, but quantitatively, to determine the biomass content of forests in particular in the various forest layers. So the canopy, the top layer of the forest, the middle layer of the forest, and then also the lower layers close to the ground or even at the ground level, which is important to really understand how much carbon dioxide is actually contained in a forest. And that's something that, again, in experiments, in airborne campaigns has been tested and developed. But to use it systematically, globally, in a multi-year campaign with a satellite, with all the advantages that satellite observations bring, is rather new. And the context is also important because the mission is clearly dedicated to things that have a strong impact, for example, on understanding impact of the vegetation on the climate, global climate. And that fits again with other Earth Explorers that we have launched. The last one we launched was EarthCare, with a clear ambition to understand cloud formation, cloud properties, or climate impact. Again, this is filling a gap in terms of analytics that has not been filled before. We are seeing completely new signals, completely new levels of quantifiable information, verifiable information that wasn't available in the past.
So as in SAR structure, one of the challenges with SAR is that you need a lot of energy that you emit from the satellite to get the signals then bounce back from Earth and analyze that. And as a new one, and we have seen the SAR development on the commercial or the military side over the last, I would say, 3 years, 5 years, with rapid development and now down to, I think, 30 centimeter ground resolution, what is absolutely fantastic. I think you're coming from another point of view here, but the question remains the same and physics potentially same. So what can you cover? What is the realistic you can cover in the flight? So how much time do you have to get a piece of information done?
It's a very good question. The operating time of the instrument is clearly a limiting factor. We are running with a power of 100 watts. It's not a huge amount of power. It's what I would call a traditional bright shining light bulb. But in the end, that power needs to be generated, needs to be managed, and is also determining the length of the data takes, for example. So we need to make sure that we can manage the incoming data, that we can manage all the other subsystems, which also require power. So it's a very delicate satellite autonomous power management and data management challenge that all of these satellites need to handle. But it's particularly true for active satellites, and in that category, Biomass falls, where we need to actively send a signal to the ground and receive and process and amplify the return signal. So what happens is typically we need to be careful on the cycles in which we switch on the instrument. Typically, this is in the minutes time frame. So we will have several minutes, up to 20, 30 minutes cycles in which the instruments can be switched on. That has an impact also on the mission profile. So how do we maximize the coverage? And we want global coverage. We are not focusing on a specific terrestrial domain. We really want global coverage because we don't even know yet how much in detail in terms of biomass, in terms of climate relevant carbon capture is really distributed in different domains. We have rough estimates, but really breaking it down and also understanding changes, seasonal changes in terms of climate change related changes, not really quantified at that stage. That's one of the key ambition. And that requires also a certain level of flexibility, optimization of the system, tuning it towards optimal data generation, optimal mission profile. And this is why we also need a commissioning phase. Again, if we would have a sensor system that would have been used many times before, we would know a lot of the parameters and boundary conditions. Mm-hmm. But here we need a little bit more time also in terms of what we call the initialization phase for the satellite to make sure that all of this happens.
What is the period of time you're talking about?
Months. Okay. So we're talking 4, 5, 6 months. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. And it also goes hand in hand with the ambition to make sure that we optimize in terms of data quality and data validation, because this is free and open data. I think that's one of the key statements that I want to put out into the public here. Everyone will be able to access the data in the end, will be able to use that data. And we are particularly providing also environments where that usage of data via processing tools, via environments in which you don't need excessive computer power on your own in order to get a higher level information out of this data will be made available. That's one of the data management ambitions that we're pursuing with that mission as well. But the bottom line is that we need this initialization phase to make sure that when we are sending out data fully free and open, that people are not getting disappointed with blips in the data quality, with uncalibrated or unvalidated data. I think it's an inherent responsibility that comes with free and open data that we use that initial phase to make sure that what reaches everyone, and it's not dedicated to scientists who would be able to assess the quality, for example, on their own and to put everything in the right context so that it's fit for public use, would say a bit liberally here.
What is the revisiting time when you said the aim is to cover the entire globe? So what is then the revisiting time, especially when you talked about soil moisture and wildfire predictions, so all of that, there is a time critical component in it.
Yes, but the soil moisture was referring to a different mission. Soil moisture is our SMOS mission, soil moisture and ocean salinity. So here we have a bit of a different mission profile and different logic. For biomass, the information will be collected over a few months in terms of campaigns. So we want to take, I think, about 9 months for an initial tomographic, meaning multi-layer analysis of the forests with global coverage. That will take a few months to really cover all these parts at different levels and using the instrument in that mode, and then repeating it of another set of months in order to complement and to sharpen the picture that is emerging and to detect the changes. I think that's the second element here. And basically you can break the mission profile into a multi-month profile, adding up to the nominal lifetime of 5 years. That's the nominal lifetime that we are expecting for all our Earth explorers. And we are actually quite lucky that most of the Earth explorers are living way beyond their designated lifetime. So there may be things that we will be doing after this cycle of multi-month measurement campaigns, adding up to the 5 years. So we are hoping to go beyond that as well.
I understand. So how do you dump the data down to Earth? Is there a series of ground stations? Because what I sense is there will be a lot of data produced by the satellite. When you talk about multi-layer, we talk just about one band, but it is multi-layer here. Yeah. And so how do you manage that?
Radar missions are notorious for data volume. They generate by far the most data volume. What we are doing here is we have our what we call data acquisition stations active throughout the day. So there are multiple paths during the day in which the data is downloaded to our acquisition stations. Typical, because we are using typical Earth observation orbits here, we are talking about ground stations that are more in the polar regions. One of the most effective ground stations is one station called Svalbard, provided by a Norwegian company, which is located so far north that practically every orbit is covered by that ground station. Gives us a lot of opportunities to download the data. But again, even the acquisition logic needs to be optimized towards what the instrument actually does and what the overall mission profile is looking like once we have gone through this commissioning phase, this initialization phase that I was talking about earlier, so that we, in terms of efficiency, and it's also a cost issue because acquisition stations cost money, that we end up in a fully optimized scenario in terms of data acquisition, in terms of cost, in terms of reliability. That's also an important thing. We don't want to lose data in these acquisition phases, but it's one of the more established parts since it's a very vibrant business actually these days to provide these ground station acquisition services to satellites. We are actually quite well covered. And again, having these ground stations and having backup scenarios, there's always more opportunities involved so that if one ground station cannot cover that, another ground station can make sure that we're not losing data. And we have never lost data on that line. Sometimes we had issues with ground stations, also with scientific satellites, but usually the only impact was that some of the data was released a little bit with some delay. That's the maximum that we usually see. So the acquisition business is not our primary concern, I would say. From a technical point of view, from an operational point of view, it's clearly the unusual structure of the satellite and this large unfolding antenna, the 12-meter antenna, the operation of such a structure and what it means for a satellite in operations to deal with that. Let's not forget we are, for example, in a very busy orbit. We need the ability to avoid collisions once in a while, and the orbit that the satellite is crowded to an extent that we need that capability to fly evasion maneuvers. On average, this is happening now for all of our satellites. So for our combined fleet of Earth observation satellites, Copernicus, Sentinels, Earth Explorers, about once a week. So we are not talking about something that is happening just occasionally. It's something that is quite regularly happening. And again, we're talking about a satellite with a fragile, huge structure that needs special measures. We need to understand a little bit the behavior of the satellite in terms of attitude control, the dynamics of all the systems, clearly depending also on the strange geometry. I mean, the satellite looks like a big umbrella with a small satellite body attached to it, and that makes it very special also from a satellite flight operations perspective.
It's not a race car, obviously.
It's not a race car. It's a fragile thing. The most immediate concern is of the unfolding of the antenna. It's now packaged in a very tight way. And again, for Earth observation purposes, in that orbit, such an antenna has never been used. We are pioneering, exploring the frontiers of the technological possible, also in terms of mechanics, in terms of operational behavior. So a lot of things to be learned, and that makes Biomass a very special mission for us. Definitely.
I can hear your excitement about it. New frontiers as well, because it's, as we said at the beginning, it's not just, another XYZ satellite. It's a very special one. But let's talk about the data. So who is the main users? Is it the scientific community? Are these policymakers? Are these climate institutes? Or it's all primarily civil? I assume. Yeah. We know that it's all dual use, but you're focusing on the civil side, I think.
Yes, absolutely. The Earth Explorer program is coming out of our, what I would call, core business of Earth science-driven programmatic priorities. We want to be strong on the Earth science side because we feel that Earth science and the science that can be done with the data that the Earth Explorers and, by the way, also the Copernicus Sentinels are generating, although the key purpose of the Copernicus Sentinels is not science, but it turns out that in the end, for example, the number of publications coming out of the Copernicus Sentinels is actually larger than coming out of the Earth Explorers, having to do with the fact that the Earth Explorers are always a new scientific field. And there's initially a smaller community, but typically expanding quickly after that new technology is being established. But you're right. So the key ambition is to provide solid science in order to generate robust facts about the state of the planet, the evolution of the planet, and the future evolution of the Earth system overall. And this is where our digital twin programs come in as well, because something that we are doing in conjunction with these kind of new data for the scientific community, but not only for the scientific community, is we are combining all these data into a data pool that is feeding physical models and high-performance computing that we are employing into something that we call predictive Earth observation. So up to now, we were only able to say, look, we have 3 generations of Earth observations here. We can understand how the past of the planet looked over the last 30 years from space. We can be very quick in understanding what it currently looks, but we had very little means to really extrapolate forward to generate scenarios. This is now completely changing with the utilization of these models and the utilization of high-performance supercomputers. And Europe has very good supercomputer capabilities. And that's the logic and the purpose of the digital twins that we are employing to get into that realm of predictive Earth observation for all aspects of Earth observation. A domain that has been using that principle for quite some time is, of course, meteorology. In meteorology, you have weather predictions, but we are now doing it for vegetation. We are doing it for agriculture. We are doing it for urban development. And that shows what is really changing is the diversity of data that can supply the data pool that goes into the physical models, leading to predictive scenarios via supercomputing scenario generation. That's one of the key purposes. The other purpose, of course, is what we call fostering specific scientific domains. And what we are seeing for all Earth Explorers, and Biomass will not be an exception, is that it is not possible anymore to clearly define the parameter of these scientific domains. We see a strong transition between scientific domains that are interested. And luckily in Earth observation, that has been a trend that is accelerating, but has been going on for some time, that what used to be very vertical, very isolated scientific fields are reaching out, are connecting with other scientific domains. So vegetation, biomass, sustainability, ecosystem, diversity domains, for example. Vegetation is an issue for biodiversity, for example, as well. Now deeply connects with climate change, atmospheric composition, even with oceanography aspects, because the ocean system is connected to the vegetation system on land. And all of these domains are linking quickly up into a much more holistic view of Earth system science. And this is why we are rather hesitant to name specific scientific domains. We are really talking about Earth system science being the recipient of that plethora of data that we are generating. And again, with 2 key ambitions. The first one I just mentioned is being able to predict what happens if mankind is interfering with these systems. We are doing it anyway, but now we are able to really get quantitative what-if scenarios. And the second aspect that is also key is to what I would call democratize the data for use beyond the scientific domains, meaning the data should be as usable. And I've given initially a few elements here. We are providing tools and computing power as well, for example, in the digital twin context, to users to develop their own applications, their own services. And that always has also a commercial component. I'm absolutely sure we've seen it for all Earth Explorers. Each of the Earth Explorers that we have launched so far has found its way into at least complementing and reinforcing and valorizing commercial services, Earth observation services. There's not a single Earth Explorer that is not having that dimension as well. And we see that for Biomass coming as well.
Thanks for this explanation. I hear that there's a huge chunk, a 90+% chunk, still in this science community grounded. You talked about the diversity and the different silos that are now interconnected. I get that. But from a taxpayer point of view, I'm asking, hey, what is in for me? So how that might influence the policymakers' decisions for XYZ actions. So how far can you go with that data? Or to ask very concrete, can you help in monitoring illegal deforestation when we talk about carbon credit schema, all of these measures that we try to take to fight climate change at the moment? Because at the moment, for me, it sounds still very science-oriented and I'm missing the reality here.
Let's be clear. We need the scientific component to valorize and to make sure that what we are generating is reliable information in the end. So that's part of the overall logic that we are applying. But you are right. In the end, it's not the scientific output that per se is justifying all of this. It's the scientifically grounded, fact-based, grounded and reliable information, quality information that can be generated from the data that has a strong scientific reliability rooting. You have given extremely good example in the management. Carbon management is one of the key issues to be looked at when it comes to climate measures, but even the economic side. What is the impact of large-scale change in forest type? If even reforestation may have an impact that we are not completely understanding, even though reforestation has an extremely positive connotation, greening the deserts, whatever we do. But there may be biomass-related and carbon cycle-related aspects of it that we haven't fully understood yet. And some of the implications will have a direct impact within the next 5 years on how to make good choices. What kind of trees do we want to plant? What kind of trees should be utilized? What kind of economic management schemes are generating what kind of biomass signatures in different climatic zones, for example. And I think most importantly, all of this is happening under continuously changing climatic and other boundary conditions. So we are not talking about a static system that needs to be understood. We are talking about a dynamic, a changing system that needs to be understood. And again, this is why a satellite is so different from what I would call in situ isolated understanding. You can only understand the dynamics of all of this if you understand the parts of it, and understanding the parts of it not only on a global level, but on the regional level and the local level. And that's something that only satellites can provide. And that makes the Earth explorers and also the other Earth observation satellites such a unique, important tool to do exactly what you're describing, up to the commercial part of what I would call forest management. Good choices in reforestation, good choices in understanding the relationship of other ecosystems. The agriculture and forests, the oceans and forests, all is clearly connected.
I'm sold on it. Thank you.
Okay.
We can't have an interview these days about our Earth observation, our component, without talking about geopolitics. You talked about the freedom of science and the validity of science data, also something that is globally heavily discussed at the moment, or we can call it in jeopardy. But from your point of view, so how does Earth observation contribute to Europe's geopolitical autonomy and resilience?
Maybe a few facts up front, which I think are putting that question in good light. Earth observation is by far the largest budgetary domain of the European Space Agency. Earth observation makes about a third of the overall budget of the European Space Agency currently. And that means, together with the budgets that the European Union is investing in Earth observation, Copernicus, the best example, Europe is actually investing more than the United States in that type of space activity. That makes it the only type of space activity where Europe is clearly leading in the world. Copernicus, our systems, the commercial missions that we are running in Europe, also the national missions that are running by countries in Europe, all together. This is by far the most sophisticated and the most impactful Earth observation system in the world. We are disseminating 4 times as much data as NASA, for example, just to give one key example. And we are just in the process of expanding Copernicus as well. We will continue the build-up of the fleet of Earth explorers in parallel, but the expansion of the capacity of Copernicus will be even more exponential than what we are doing on the Earth Explorer side. That's a remarkable thing where we in Europe will really build and expand the leadership that we have gained in terms of Earth observation in the world. And that's, I think, a very strong geopolitical statement that we feel understanding the Earth, understanding how to utilize the technology and how to bring new technologies into our ability to look at the Earth and understanding the Earth is a strong geopolitical autonomous sovereignty statement, I would say, for Europe. Clearly strong ambitions, and we will continue these ambitions. When it comes to the data policy, so far we feel we have much more benefits in a free and open data policy that we want to maintain, in particular in the Earth Explorer domain, because we need a global community to provide us feedback on how to utilize the system best, how to tune the system to its best performance. And I would say people might say that in these times, you have to make sure that all the advantages, for example, with European companies on utilizing that data. But I would say that we should, in Europe, and European companies, European scientific communities should harness the advantage, the inherent advantage of having a European system on which future we decide, on which data quality, data veracity, data timeliness, we have full control. So we have a few, what I would say, unique European assets to make sure that we can provide also the European scientific ecosystem, the commercial ecosystem, the operational, the institutional ecosystem with sufficient advantages that having a European system at hand is justifying and is giving us a good position in the global competition, even with free and open data policy. That's how I would justify also that we are maintaining that.
Absolutely. I think that's very important to remind our audience as well that Europe is better than we think it is sometimes, and we shouldn't play our cards down too easily. One more question on the geopolitics here. We're talking with Biomass satellite about a sensitive radar band. Were there international coordination challenges, so particular over the spectrum use or data access, or is it something that are not relevant in that case here?
Yeah, I'm not so familiar with all the details. I remember a few discussions. Frequency allocation is always a big and complicated issue, and it has been in that case definitely as well. But I think from an operational point of view, I don't see any specific challenges out of the usual. There's always the question of potential interferences with commercial and military facilities, for example. But usually this is quite well handled. And if there are problems arising, we have this with other missions where we use radar scientifically, then coordination efforts on the international level is going quite well.
That's on the ITU level then?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and usually we have found always the compromises that didn't jeopardize even the long-term programmatic outlook that we're having. Let's not forget that Biomass, as all the Earth Explorers, have a development time of about 10 years. And therefore, we need to be able to say, even up at the beginning of that development cycle, that we will not run into operational problems with the allocation of frequencies. But here, it's a constant point for awareness and constant point of action, and that a lot of people in ESA are involved, making sure that this is happening in the interest of Earth observation, because Earth observation is such a central space activity for Europe. But I don't see anything out of the ordinary to be done in that context here for Biomass, especially because Biomass really has a strong focus on this forestry aspect. It may be a little bit less complex than other things that we are looking at.
Even forest management and so on can be a political tool, like everything today. And so our topics like shutter control that you have on the optical imagery can be an issue, or are you really able to cover the entire world?
I think for the moment, I understand we have no limitations. And if something arises, then we will react to it. We will find ways to manage that. But overall, and considering the current situation, I can say, at least for the Earth Explorers, we have still a very strong leverage of using them. No limitations in terms of operations. And the data per se is not what I would call defense relevant data. It has weather data and all kinds of other data has dual use potential, but it's not directly data that, for example, a defense ministry would be interested in.
I mean, you mentioned now a few times how the biomass data will be made available, like the other Copernicus missions, so in a free and open way. Great. So check mark on that. But what are the expectations around latency, processing time, and how soon can users work with the satellite data after the initial phase that you mentioned before? So from taking a picture to the available data, what is the delay here?
Usually within a day. I think that's what we are trying to do. It depends a little bit on the mission profile and specific. It depends also on the data product that we are making available. But if people would like to check a little bit the kind of data services that we are providing, we have our platform, the Earth Online system. I think that's the ESA Earth Online reference that we're usually giving in order for people to get acquainted, to get familiar with how Earth Explorer data, but also other data is made usable, visible. And it depends a little bit on the data product. More complex data product need a bit more time. It can then take also. And some products are what I would call compository products, where you actually need several weeks, months in order to compile something, and then it will be released. Then some data is made available very quickly. Again, it depends a little bit how also the commissioning phase goes. The scientific community has a role, and the mission management that we are having on our side once the commissioning is over, having a role to make sure that whatever is generated is optimally used. And if people have ideas, maybe that's an incentive here also for your audience, is give us feedback. The mission manager is Klaus Schippal in my department here. Send them messages what kind of product, what kind of services that you would like to see. We cannot accommodate everything because there may be contradictory aspirations, but we need to understand how you want to use that kind of information, data, ask questions, whether also or how that combines with other data sets that are out there. Some people may be interested combining in situ data with satellite data. These are all relevant feedbacks. And in addition, we will provide, of course, for meetings in which the user community will be regular convened in order to discuss the mission profile, the optimization. That's what we call mission management. And that's the key task that I have and my mission managers have to make sure that we optimize the mission towards the user community. We have no other priority than actual user satisfaction. There's even, I would say, the broader user community is at least, if not much more important than a specific scientific community to be fed with data.
It's great to hear. Let's look 5 years ahead. 5+ years ahead, our end of life. We can't have this conversation here without talking about that, because biomass is part of ESA's growing commitment to responsible space operations. Or what measures are in place to ensure this satellite complies with the zero debris charter at the end of its life? And you alluded at the development time, and I had made this experience with EarthCare. The satellite was developed before, or was planned before, zero debris charter came into play last year, if I'm not mistaken. So the question is how to mitigate this gap, especially with this very fragile environment or structure that you talked about.
We will try to be compliant with our own standards here. It's very clear. I think in terms of managing that system, we have everything in place to do that. One of the questions that always comes up is the antenna constituting a specific problem here. I would say no. I think again, in the context of complex operations that we will have to do anyway, it will be part of the complex re-entry process. But again, we are making big progress here. We have learned a lot, for example, with a semi-controlled re-entry of Aeolus just 2 years ago. That was already showing our ambition to have a, say, non-polluting policy in place, and step by step implementing more of that. Biomass follows that trend. What is relevant to say is that most of the issues that we have in terms of collision risks, for example, is actually coming from components that are not constituting in what I would call fully controllable satellites. Actually, even with other operators, we have good schemes in place to avoid these situations and to mitigate space debris risks. It's really the portion that is not controllable. So passive components, fragments of previous collisions, upper stage parts that are not yet re-entered. These are the typical things that give us more headaches, because here we have only one component being able to react to the situation. Also small satellites that are completely passive, no attitude, no orbit control systems, they give us more headaches at this stage. And in that sense, I think all of the larger, fully controlled, fully monitored, fully operated, continuously operated. Let's not forget there are satellites out there that have been abandoned or lost for decades even. And these are much, much more complicated and much more, let's say, critical in that sense. So I think we are on a good track, and we will continuously look into how we can optimize controlled re-entry scenarios and all of this. And Biomass is clearly following that path. On a footnote, the whole logic of a satellite mission hinges a little bit about the fact that you have a lot of problems at the beginning of a mission and at the end. The famous U profile. We see that also in operations cost, by the way. Again, we try multi-mission, very efficient operations. But at the end of the mission, when things get old and you start to worry about onboard resources, then costs, complexity, and also required flexibility increase dramatically. And that will be true for all the missions, especially when you actually build good satellites. And European companies, Airbus has built an extremely good satellite here with Biomass and many other satellites. But when they get really old, then you have to spend an extra effort. And we need to keep that also in mind in terms of the people who are funding, that people don't assume that this is an extrapolation into infinitely efficient and low-cost operations. There is a point in time when you actually have to invest more time, money, and intelligence in a mission to make sure that you bring it to a good end. And there's another footnote that I would like to bring in. A mission doesn't end with the satellite for us. We are investing a lot of money to maintain the data that is the ultimate product of a space program. Even when the satellite has long been forgotten and has ceased to exist, we spend a lot of effort making sure that, for example, our data is not only securely stored, but is always kept in a format and at a level that it can be seamlessly used by the most modern data integration systems, where the data can be used in other systems. And that's a considerable effort. We're spending a lot of money on these things just to keep the data fresh, in the sense to be usable at any point in time in the future as well. It's not a straightforward thing, and people tend to forget that aspect a little bit because everything is so focusing on the spacecraft. But the real challenge we find now is, now that we are in 3 generations of Earth observation missions, is the data management part. But there's also a lot to be gained, because these challenges are challenges to the IT industry in the end. And that can make IT industry in Europe strong if they find good, efficient, novel solutions. Even with new tools, AI, of course, is a big topic here, but also in terms of involving users, for example, putting a little bit of the load in the user community that may be able to absorb it. There are many new schemes to be looked at, multi-mission, very diverse data sets, a big challenge for IT industry. I'm talking these days much more to IT industry than to space industry. That's an interesting side aspect in Earth observation, that it's an opportunity for the European IT industry to get a competitive edge, because it's putting specific challenges to them as well.
At the end, it's just a sensor in space that generates data.
As a space agency, we are excited about spacecraft and satellites, but there's a very exciting world behind this in terms of the data and the information and the knowledge management that comes out of this. And that's what I want to advertise a little bit here as well.
So when do we expect the first science quality data to become available?
Will be as part of the commissioning phase already,
Sure.
But the availability happens when the commissioning phase is over and we open the data platform. Keep looking for the Earth Online announcements that we have on Biomass. You will see within a few months. I'm a bit hesitant to give a very specific date, because there may be a few specific surprises that we need to take and that we need to handle. The key thing is, once you get full and free and open access in a few months, it means you will have solid, quality checked, robust data. You will not have negative surprises. So you can use that data for whatever purpose, even commercial applications, as we said earlier.
And if I remember, your boss Simonetta said yesterday that by Living Planet in Vienna, she tried to show some first results. So
absolutely, we'll use our events to make sure that your interest remains high and your appetite increases till we go for full, free and open.
Great. Nick, thank you very much for your time. It was a great pleasure talking with you about this wonderful project, Biomass, and I'm looking forward to see the first data as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it was very interesting talking to you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And if you have further questions, reach out to us at radio@SpaceWatch.Global. If you like these or other episodes of Space Café Radio, leave us a rating on your preferred podcast platform. It is the currency of today. And if you want to stay on the pulse of the space industry, please visit our website at www.SpaceWatch.Global and subscribe to our newsletters. And of course, don't forget to become a Space Watcher. I'm Torsten Kriening, publisher at SpaceWatch.Global, your independent perspective on space.